right now on WCNC Charlotte.
The dangers have been downplayed.
Duke Energy has always said everything is safe. The coal ash is safe.
Growing concerns over what's under our feet.
You give your kids a good breakfast, you give them their multivitamin, and then send them to a toxic coal ash site for 8 hours. It's absolutely insane.
Millions of tons of coal ash used as structural fill across North Carolina.
The idea that leave it as is, it's not an option.
Because of the danger to the kids.
Because of the risk for the kids.
Parents, scientists, and advocates calling for change.
Who are you mad at?
I'm just angry at everybody, I guess. Everybody that knew.
Do the parents know that there's coal ash under here?
Not gonna get roped into any of that, but thank you.
The EPA now actively involved as a lawsuit against Duke Energy plays out in court.
Knowing that my child was exposed to that, knowing that I was exposed to that.
Now, action underway in response to our buried investigation.
On the surface, the view can take your breath away. It's no wonder families are racing to live here. But a cloud hangs over Mooresville, the fastest growing suburb in America.
I'll get honks and yells of support,
And people like Lori Deans
but then I'll also get screamed at and cussed.
believe the truth lies buried,
The dangers have been downplayed.
some of it under kids.
I don't want anyone else to have to go through what we have.
For Deans, it's personal. She says her 27-year-old son, Aaron, died from cancer in 2021.
The light in every room.
While we'll never know if coal ash harmed Aaron, his mom says leading up to his testicular cancer diagnosis, her son spent years digging in the dirt for work.
He did not deserve to live on toxic waste and not be warned.
Deans now dedicates her life to uncovering what's in the soil.
I don't want to step in it.
Depending where she steps, a cocktail of toxic ingredients could be beneath her feet. Deans is armed with a radiation-detecting Geiger counter.
Every time we find 18 to 27, we got coal ash.
She's using the technology to help map possible coal ash sites in this area.
Generational poisoning is what it is.
Because regulators have only partially documented where the coal ash sits.
We don't even know where all of it's at.
Coal ash is found in communities all over the South, but it's especially common in Mooresville. Some of it originates here. The Marshall Steam Station on Lake Norman powers around 2 million homes. When coal is burned, coal ash is left behind. Decades ago, Duke Energy legally sold that byproduct to builders who needed cheap fill dirt. Back in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, people could also pick it up by the truckload and bring it home.
Duke often sold or marketed through a third party coal ash to outside folks who wanted to improve their property.
Coal ash played an integral role in the construction and housing booms of both Mooresville and Huntersville.
Absolutely, it was acceptable and regulated by the state.
Duke Energy says those regulations, which the utility followed, were meant to ensure the safe use of coal ash. Public records identify nearly 9 million tons of it, at a minimum, buried underground across North Carolina. About a third of that in the Charlotte area, including along major highways.
And I hit coal ash on the first try.
Deans discovered an estimated 100,000 tons of coal ash alone under and around this daycare.
Those parents need to be warned.
Did Tutor Time ever tell you about the coal ash that was there?
No, it was never mentioned.
Never?
Never.
Tutor Time of Mooresville families and employees, past and present, have said the daycare never disclosed the coal ash buried below until after WCNC Charlotte started asking questions.
Absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Especially concerning for these parents. In the moment, it all seemed so clear.
They were really good to him there.
Tutor Time of Mooresville only benefited Declan Apap.
Say, have a good day, Mommy. Okay, Mommy.
How's your day?
Good.
Today,
Declan.
Almost 10 years later,
Hi, bud.
knowing what they know now about the coal ash under the daycare, the 11-year-old's parents are no longer convinced.
We were never told anything.
That lack of potentially pertinent information is especially problematic, considering Declan's medical history following his time at the daycare.
GI issues,
Asthma.
ADHD, a heart murmur.
Declan attended Tutor Time for roughly 2.5 years a decade ago.
I mean, I recommended people to go there.
His mom, Jennifer, worked there.
Knowing that my child was exposed to that, knowing that I was exposed to that.
In recent years, the boy has dealt with a growing number of health problems, including a blood clot in his brain.
It was his whole right side.
Medical records show doctors think a bout with the flu, coupled with a genetic mutation, triggered his March hospitalization.
There's always a hypothesis.
But Declan's parents have their doubts.
It's been 6 months of this guessing game.
While they can't say with any certainty if coal ash has had any negative health impact on their son, they're now left to wonder.
I see them worrying about me, but I don't know what they're worrying about, and that makes me nervous.
Scientists say parents have reason to worry.
Do you think it's safe?
Safe for kids to play over the top of coal ash? No.
Dr. Julia Kravchenko is an assistant professor with the Duke University School of Medicine.
I don't think it's safe.
She's also a mother who has researched the dangers of coal ash.
Would you let your kids play on top of coal ash?
No.
She says there's a laundry list of potential health impacts, including asthma, developmental disorders, and cardiovascular disease.
Long-term exposure is much worse.
And while much depends on a person's specific makeup and what's actually found in the ash,
they could be easily contaminated.
She says kids are especially vulnerable.
As a father of 4, how much does this concern you?
I would very much be concerned.
Dr. Avner Vengash is a leading expert on coal ash.
Unlike soil, coal ash is composed of very tiny nanoparticles that we know it's becoming airborne.
The Duke University distinguished professor says the closer coal ash is to the surface, the greater the risk a child can inhale or ingest it. A major concern when kids are playing on top of it every day.
Touching soil containing coal ash could be really problematic for the health of those children.
Health and environmental agencies in North Carolina say when structural fills are properly managed, the risk for folks is low. But we found failures in management and inspections. The potential impact on people's health. Next.
The issue is the long term. The continuous exposure, that is the problematic aspect.
That's what scientists say about coal ash. But their fears contradict Duke Energy's stance.
Is coal ash toxic?
No.
The utilities long minimized the risks.
There is a constituent in coal ash, arsenic, that is a carcinogen. Someone would have to have a very high exposure rate over a very long period of time.
That's what now retired spokesperson Paige Sheehan said in years past, as WCNC Charlotte investigated, in part, unusually high rates of thyroid cancer in Mooresville.
None of the information that we have right now is pointing to coal ash.
Duke Energy maintains the presence of arsenic, a known carcinogen, in coal ash does not equate to a risk to human health or the environment. That said, the utility's own test results from coal ash samples collected between 2015 and 2019 show some arsenic levels at least more than 10 times higher than what's in the soil naturally.
That is unsafe. And for you to take and put that into fill to be used for housing or fill to be used for daycare, those are levels that in any other circumstance would require cleanup.
Chris Nidell is an environmental attorney and chemical engineer.
Several of coal ash's ingredients are toxic. I don't know any other way to say then that makes coal ash toxic.
He worries a speck of dust could enter a person, lodge in their bodies, and then radiate over time. That, scientists say, is more likely when coal ash is close to the surface. Pictures we found suggest the presence of exposed coal ash at Tudor Time of Mooresville multiple times over the years. The rules require yearly inspections for older structural fills, but state regulators could only show us proof they inspected the property in 2023, no other years prior.
We are doing an experiment on the health and well-being of people like those kids.
You only have to look west to see the impacts of coal ash on human health. In the aftermath of a 2008 coal ash slurry spill involving another utility in Tennessee, contracted cleanup workers sued. Attorneys argued the crews, who weren't wearing protective equipment, were exposed daily to toxic levels of arsenic and radioactive material, among other contaminants. Hundreds became sick, and more than 60 died.
The case in the end was a referendum on the toxicity of coal ash.
Dr. Angela Hine served as medical consultant on that case.
We all have a right to know what we've been exposed to and how it might affect our health and health trajectory.
Dr. Hine spent childhood summers in Lake Norman and says her mom and brother live there today.
I had thyroid cancer in my 40s.
The Asheville physician says she began studying toxic exposure after her own diagnosis.
I hope that we will get a lot of data from the Tudor Times site.
She's since turned her attention to the daycare.
As a professional and as a mother, this is what I would want to know. Across the entire property, what is the depth of the coal ash?
With a scientist's guidance, we donned safety equipment.
Don't want to take any chances here.
And collected samples from a public median near the daycare. Not only did we find coal ash closer to the surface than state rules allow, our samples,
these two,
tested by Duke University scientist Dr. Avner Vengash,
So we measured the isotopes in this here,
showed risky levels of the carcinogens arsenic and radium. His analysis found levels of arsenic, on average, 69 times higher than North Carolina's own soil remediation goals, and nearly 13 times higher than average levels in the natural soil. The radium results, meanwhile, showed elevated radioactivity, at its highest, exceeding the Environmental Protection Agency's cleanup standard, and on average, more than 4 times higher than the approximate natural levels in North Carolina soil. And those are just some of the many elements he found.
What's unique about the coal ash, we're having a cocktail of multiple contaminants that those children could be exposed into it. So the impact could be even more severe than just one contaminant.
Duke Energy says all trace elements in coal ash, including arsenic and radium, combined make up less than 1% of the mixture. That doesn't ease Dr. Vengash's worries.
The impact is not immediate.
Especially concerning to him is just how long it could take for the health effects, including cancers, to show up.
It could be 5-7 years gap in between exposure to actually the occurrence of the health impact.
He and other scientists say some of those impacts may not surface for decades.
A Duke Energy spokesperson tells us countless risk factors can impact somebody's health, and that the utility is not aware of any scientific research linking health effects in the Lake Norman area and coal ash. Still to come, why those battling cancer have their doubts.
Rewind, roughly a quarter century.
It was a different lifetime, I guess.
Put it there, Matt, and find it on yours.
Just another day in the classroom at Rock Springs Elementary.
Yeah, I miss teaching.
A job that, over the span of about 8 years,
That's Walker, that's Aaron,
left an impression on Lisa Saab.
that's Catherine, that's Dion. These kids have got to be 30 years old now.
Fast forward to today.
I had heard of coal ash being in Huntersville and in Morrisville, but I just thought we were safe.
The former teacher is only now learning a valuable lesson of her own about that Denver school and the coal ash quietly placed there just 3 years before she started.
I'm just angry at everybody, I guess. Everybody that knew.
Let's briefly hit pause. State environmental records show there are about 300 tons of coal ash at this school. Duke Energy says while a small amount was used as truck access drive for the site, most was what's called flowable fill, blended in a cement mixture and permanently encased in the cement. The utility says the EPA has studied the safety of using coal ash in concrete and found it meets benchmarks for the protection of human health. The limited records that are publicly available don't reveal who placed the mixture there in the mid-90s. But the state says the amount was so small, it didn't qualify for the rules governing structural fills. State and federal regulators have created rules to minimize the potential for harm, including requiring structural fills be at least 1.5 feet below the surface. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality says the permit also did not require tracking the final location of the ash, meaning we don't know where on the school property it's buried.
Oh, the school bus.
Yeah, Maxwell's here.
A major concern for Caitlin Overson,
I wanted to go somewhere that I thought was safe.
who moved her family to Denver from Mooresville.
You give your kids a good breakfast, you give them their multivitamin, and then send them to a toxic coal ash site for 8 hours. It's absolutely insane.
We moved to get away from the coal ash.
Jennifer Miller also fled Mooresville, only to recently learn her kids are now closer than ever to coal ash.
I'm absolutely petrified.
Both moms are terrified about what this revelation could mean for their kids.
It's extremely scary.
He plays in that soccer field every day with his friends. He comes home filthy sometimes because of it.
At Rock Springs, it's unclear if any of the coal ash is exposed. Scientists have said the potential health impacts from exposure to loose coal ash include everything from short-term pregnancy complications to long-term developmental disorders and cancers that might not show up until years or even decades later.
It's really upsetting.
Words that now play over and over again in this former Rock Springs elementary teacher's mind.
I never understood why I had gotten thyroid cancer, but now it kind of makes sense.
While Lisa Saab doesn't know for sure if there's a connection, this is fact. Doctors diagnosed her with thyroid cancer in the spring of 2024. Now in remission, yet another mom.
You have to be strong for them.
Stopped in her tracks. Saab says she's now considering a lawsuit, and she wouldn't be the first.
The entire time, Duke Energy has always said everything is safe, the coal ash is safe.
Tanya Hall sued Duke Energy in October 2024, not because of coal ash at any school, but rather due to its proximity to her house. In her lawsuit, the Sherrills Ford woman says she's lived near the Marshall Steam Station and its unlined coal ash basin for roughly 8 years.
There used to be fly ash on my car in the morning in my community.
Hall alleges Duke Energy exposed her and others to toxic substances and deliberately withheld crucial information about the dangers of coal ash.
It just feels like they don't care about the residents. They don't care.
Eventually, she says doctors diagnosed her with kidney cancer.
They knowingly put carcinogens into this community.
She and her attorneys believe Duke Energy needs to be held accountable, accusing the utility of negligence, along with unfair and deceptive trade practices, among other things.
They could have done better. They knew how to do it, but they were too cheap.
They've joined a growing call for a federal investigation into the extent of contamination in and around Mooresville, something national nonprofit legal organizations have also requested.
The whole area needs to be investigated by the EPA.
The Environmental Protection Agency says it is actively evaluating the risk across the area to determine what, if any, further action may be needed. While Lincoln County Schools hasn't said much publicly about the Rock Springs site, a concerned parent shared this recent message from the school's principal with WCNC Charlotte that reads, in part, "There is no coal ash under the school's buildings or playgrounds."
Duke Energy says its involvement at Rock Springs, Tudor Time, and other sites ended decades ago. A spokesperson tells us the property owners who received the coal ash, not the utility, are the ones responsible for maintenance and compliance. Speaking of taking responsibility,
do the parents know that there's coal ash under here?
Not going to get roped into any of that, but thank you.
Our investigation prompts safety improvements at Tudor Time of Mooresville. That's up next.
Long before parents became aware of the coal ash buried under Tudor Time of Mooresville,
she developed a lump on the side of her neck.
Susan Wynn's 16-year-old daughter battled thyroid cancer.
I asked scientists all over this country, including the ones at Duke University, I said, is this safe? And they say, no, it's loaded with toxic chemicals.
Wynn, who later moved away from Mooresville, became a guiding voice for those unwilling to accept the narrative that coal ash is safe.
Of course they're going to say it's safe. It's not.
Eventually, famed environmental activist Erin Brockovich amplified her concerns.
They built on it, and you have a sick community.
Today,
this is my Geiger counter.
Lori Deans has taken the baton.
Gonna go test each coal ash site and go hunt down the coal ash.
After years of sounding the alarm about coal ash, action suggests people are starting to listen.
It's amazing to finally see something happening.
It's taken some time, but Tudor Time of Mooresville is the leading example.
Someone's coming?
A far cry from how it started. Hi, how you doing? Early on, while filming on a public street, the daycare's director approached us and expressed concerns.
Already had 2 parents come up.
Not about the coal ash.
Records show it's 100,000 tons beneath this area of coal ash.
Okay.
That doesn't concern you?
Really not going to talk about it.
But instead, that our cameras would identify kids.
Do the parents know that there's coal ash under here?
Not going to get roped into any of that, but thank you.
In the weeks prior, a spokesperson told WCNC Charlotte the daycare, built more than 20 years ago, had no reason to believe there was any health or safety risk to students and staff. But then we pointed out what looked like exposed coal ash along the playground's fence line. Tutor Time quickly responded, calling in crews to cover it up, and not long after, promised to test the soil on its property out of an abundance of caution.
I will keep this school open. If there is nothing but 3 dead kids in this building.
Even so, behind closed doors, the daycare's director downplayed the risk.
I've been here for 10 years, and I have not had any symptoms of anything that I would say it's because of coal ash.
WCNC Charlotte obtained audio of her addressing Tutor Time employees.
You're walking on grass. You're not walking on coal ash.
The daycare continued assuring parents after state regulators visited, visually inspected the property, and found no risk to children.
DQ should not only walk around it.
Scientists question that conclusion.
How do they know that?
Dr. Norman Kleiman is a radiation expert at Columbia University.
In my opinion, I don't know how you can make an assessment by just visually looking at ground.
He shares concerns about kids playing on or digging in dirt that contains coal ash.
What you need to prevent is them disturbing the soil or disturbing the material and getting it airborne or digging in the ground and eating it. So limiting ingestion or inhalation.
The nonprofit Earth Justice, citing our reporting and critical shortcomings of the state's visual inspection, urged the Environmental Protection Agency to provide oversight. In a letter to the federal agency saying EPA involvement in this matter is needed to ensure the protection of public health.
The idea that leave it as is, it's not an option.
After Duke University scientist Dr. Avner Vengosh analyzed our coal ash samples taken nearby, Tutor Time came around, announcing plans for a complete playground renovation. The daycare told parents safety, security, and ensuring peace of mind were the driving force behind that decision. Meanwhile, Tutor Time's own soil samples showed coal ash at varying depths on the playground. The daycare's director told parents the majority of the property has topsoil sufficiently covering the ash, but noted a few areas where the coal ash mixture was closer to the surface. While she said environmental experts reassured them children are not at risk, Tutor Time has stopped letting kids use the playground for now as the daycare prepares for its renovation. Safety improvements, this mom says, build on her son's legacy.
I think he would be proud of it. I think he would. I feel him beside me every time I'm up here. That's what gives me the strength to keep doing this.
Her efforts are a reminder that finding the truth often takes digging. She's found 2 coal ash sites that sit below schools.
Those parents need to be warned.
State records show another structural fill is near Lake Norman High School. There's even one along the road that leads to a Belmont camp for people with disabilities and delicate medical conditions. Holy Angels, the nonprofit that runs Camp Hope, says it shares concerns about environmental quality and supports additional studies about coal ash, noting the safety and well-being of its residents are of the utmost importance. Deans can only wonder how many more structural fills remain undiscovered, under and around the most vulnerable, buried beneath the surface.